Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 187, The Light Fantastic. The episode begins with Ash and the gang walking through a very hot and dry desert. Fucking utterly exhausted by this point, as they needed water, since Ash went to go take a sip from his canteen, but it was entirely out. Misty and Brock were obviously immensely thirsty as well, with Brock really wishing that there was a nearby river where they could swim. Unfortunately, you guys are in a fucking desert. I doubt you were going to find a river. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were also in this hot-ass desert, also out of water, as Jessie tried to drink out of her canteen while spying on Ash and the gang, only to find out that it was empty as well. Jessie comes to the conclusion that they must be out of water, since James and the Meowth drank it all, so she bashes them over the head with a mallet that she somehow had. Don't ask questions. Anyways, back with Ash and the gang, they could barely even go on at this point, so they had to take a rest alongside a dried river. While there, Ash and the gang then spot some strange lights in the sky, and Brock tries to pinpoint where they came from by looking at his map, and determines that it seems as though the lights should be right over a nearby mountain, and he also finds out that close to the mountain was a nearby Pokemon Center, and Ash and the gang decided they should go there so that they could get some water and not fucking die. Called the Remoraid Mountain. As they continued walking, though, the lights suddenly disappeared, but Team Rocket was able to see them first, as they were still trailing behind Ash and the gang when they were originally spotted. Team Rocket then notices that the lights had disappeared, though, and this causes James and Meowth to think that it was merely a mirage that they were seeing due to how thirsty they were. But Jessie believed that the lights were real and ordered Meowth and James to follow Ash and the gang along with her, in hopes that they would reach the mountain eventually and they could discover the meaning behind the lights. As Team Rocket walked on, Meowth and James somehow got even more annoyed as Jessie proceeded to sing a song. Man, if only being thirsty wasn't enough, now they had to listen to Jessie's terrible singing. Anyways, as Ash and the gang were walking towards the Pokemon Center, they arrived at a site with a whole bunch of old, worn-down buildings, and Brock reads in his guidebook of the area that this area used to belong to a civilization called the Ancient Colossal Tree Tribe. And the guidebook explained that the civilization used trees to build the buildings, which confused Ash, as they hadn't seen any trees in a long-ass time, especially since they entered the desert. So he questioned how the fuck the buildings could have been constructed with trees if there was no trees around. Even stranger, Misty then notices what she thinks is a coffin belonging to a Pokemon, but then suddenly Nurse Joy shows up and corrects her that it was actually a fossil of a Pokemon called Remoraid. Ash instantly looks up Remoraid in his Pokedex, but Nurse Joy explains that he probably wouldn't be able to find much information because there hadn't been any Remoraid in the area for centuries since the rivers and lakes dried up, explaining that the area didn't always used to be a desert, which could definitely explain how trees were used to build these ancient structures for the civilization if trees were around then, right? Ash and Brock bring this up, which impresses Nurse Joy at the fact that Ash and Brock knew so much about this ancient civilization, and she confirms that yes, the ancient civilization did in fact use trees to build their buildings, and they also called themselves Remoraidians since they actually really liked Remoraid. Ironically though, the Remoraidians' actions were actually what resulted in the disappearance of the Remoraid, as due to them cutting down all the trees to build their buildings and statues for their civilization, it caused nature to go out of whack and all of the rivers and lakes to dry up. Because of this, the Remoraidians migrated to a different area, leaving this now barren area behind, as they couldn't survive otherwise, due to having no water or no way to get food or anything like that. Nurse Joy then reveals the reason why she was visiting the remains of this ancient civilization in the first place, though, which was because she had received reports that some pink flowers were miraculously growing in the area, despite it being a now dried-up desert, and she came to investigate. Ash and the gang were intrigued by this, so they proceeded to investigate with her, and they actually did manage to find some pink flowers growing. As everyone ponders how the fuck this could be possible, since flowers shouldn't have been able to grow in a desert, Nurse Joy seemingly becomes distracted by Ash, calling him very cute, which made Ash blush. However, Nurse Joy then put her hand on Pikachu and began petting him, insinuating that she was actually talking about Pikachu, not Ash. Thank God, though, because if Nurse Joy liked Ash, then we'd have to call the cops. Pedophilia. Anyways, after Ash and the gang got back up after falling down from shock, Nurse Joy then noticed that Pikachu was extremely thirsty. Yeah, no shit, they all were. But it's because of noticing Pikachu's condition that she offers to lead Ash and the gang back to the Pokemon Center so they could get some water. Yay! Team Rocket were obviously still trailing Ash and the gang, so when they heard that Ash and the gang were going to get some water by going to the Pokemon Center, they obviously wanted to come along as well. But they knew that if they simply entered the Pokemon Center, then Nurse Joy would throw them out due to them being notorious criminals. So they decided to disguise themselves as regular-ass archaeologists who had come to investigate the ancient civilization. Meowth questions how the fuck he was supposed to disguise himself as an archaeologist, leading Jessie and James to come up with a bit of a different disguise for him. Anyways, as for Ash and the gang, they eventually arrived at the Pokemon Center with Nurse Joy and drank as much water as they possibly could. Although, when they were done drinking, they eventually realized that they didn't know where the fuck this water was coming from. Like, if there was no water in the area, how did the Pokemon Center have water? Leading Nurse Joy to reveal that there was actually a mysterious underground lake below the Pokemon Center where she got the water from. She took them down the stairs to show them, and explained that the lake was filled by the water that comes as a river every dozen years. Revealing that, despite the area being a complete desert, every 12 years there was one single point where water flowed through one of the empty riverbeds somehow. And that was enough to give the Pokemon Center some water for those 12 fucking years, I guess. I don't know. Like, but why the fuck did water just appear every 12 years, Hopefully we find that out. Nurse Joy then takes Ash and the gang back up to the main floor of the Pokemon Center, where they encounter a man who had just walked in, who introduces himself as Mr. Gango. Nurse Joy recognizes him, and Mr. Gango reveals that it was because he came by this area every 12 years to draw the rainbow lights that appeared above the Remoraid Mountain, since he was an artist. Also, in turn revealing that that meant that the lights that Ash and the gang had saw earlier also occurred every 12 years. They must be linked to the water somehow. Anyways, Mr. Gango then reveals that he first saw the strange colorful lights 24 years ago, and he tried to sketch them then, but he couldn't get all of the colors of the lights because there was just so many, and he only had 7 crayons. So, 12 years later, he then returned and tried to capture all the colors with 12 crayons this time, but he found that that still wasn't enough. He also explained that the lights tended to disappear before he could even finish. He then clarified, though, that he intended to capture the lights this year with 251 fucking crayons, hoping that that would finally be enough, and also explaining that he planned to combat the time issue by simply using multiple colors at once. This led Ash to question how Gango planned to paint the lights when the lights had already appeared this year, explaining that him and his friends had just come across them. This leads Gango to panic at the fact that he might have actually missed the lights for the year, and he immediately grabs Ash and shakes him violently, questioning him what he knew about the lights, and asking him where they were located so that he could try and find them before they disappeared. However, before Ash could answer where they found the lights, Ash passed out from all the shaking. Thankfully, Brock and Misty were able to remember where they saw the lights, so they explained to Nurse Joy and Mr. Gango where the location was, and Mr. Gango compares it with where he saw the lights the previous 2 times. And it turns out that every time the lights had appeared around the exact same location above Remoraid Mountain. Ash then becomes conscious yet again as Nurse Joy uses a map to determine that at the top of Remoraid Mountain there was actually a Remoraid Lake, the only place in the area where Remoraid still remained. Nurse Joy was initially confused by this, as she thought that all the Remoraid had been extinct in the area, and further wondered how no trainers had come across these Remoraid and captured them. This leads Brock to look in his guidebook that reveals more information about Remoraid Lake, and explains that the Remoraid there were apparently notoriously difficult to catch, so that was probably the reason why it was barely known that the Remoraid even existed there to begin with, as no one had proof of actually catching one there. This revelation instead just caused Misty to have more questions, understandably, such as why these Remoraid specifically would be so hard to catch, and how these Remoraid were possibly still alive, despite the Remoraid Lake being dried up, just like all of the other areas with water. As if on cue, Team Rocket finally make their entrance into the Pokémon Center, disguised as archaeologists like they had planned, with Meowth being disguised as a mummy, and they then explain that they were in the area to study the mountain and the lake, and answer Misty's questions. They then clarify, though, that before they could go out and study the area, they were really fucking parched, and needed some water, as I remember that was their entire goal with coming to the Pokémon Center in the first place. Thankfully for them, Nurse Joy obliged, and Team Rocket began to drink a ton of water, with the exception of Meowth, because he couldn't drink without taking off his mummy disguise. Meowth got pissed off at this, and demanded that Jessie and James give him some water. Jessie and James simply told Meowth to shut the fuck up so that he wouldn't blow their cover, but Meowth wouldn't shut up, and they didn't want their cover to be blown, so they came up with the excuse of the water potentially reviving the mummy that they had with them, so they sprayed Meowth with water, right in the face, to kind of get back at him for almost blowing their cover, but Meowth didn't care. He was just happy to finally have some water. Just then, the lights suddenly appeared in the sky, leading Gango to excitedly begin to sketch them, but before he could even get a crayon out, they unfortunately disappeared. Ironically, the reason why Gango wasn't able to capture the lights in time was because he had too many colors, so he got them easily mixed up. Gango was immensely sad that he had failed, but Nurse Joy reminds him that the lights had now appeared twice today, so they could still appear again today. Perhaps, as long as the day didn't end, then the lights could still continue to appear. Gango had his doubts about this, as the previous 2 times the lights had only appeared once, so he was already extremely confused as to why they'd appeared more than once today. So he decided to go to the Remoraid Lake to check out what potentially causes the light. Ash and the gang were interested in this as well as finding out if there was truly Remoraid there, and if they were going to be harder to catch. Jessie, James, and Meowth obviously followed as well, still in their disguises, claiming that they wanted to go research to discover some facts about the land. Yeah, sure. As they all made their way to Remoraid Mountain, they happened to pass by even more pink flowers like the one from before, as well as even some grass and other foliage, which was interesting because they were in a fucking desert. Eventually, night falls, and it begins to actually get cold, as opposed to deadly hot, leading everyone to complain about the cold as opposed to the heat for once. Their complaining is then stopped, though, when they come across a giant crystal boulder that looked almost as big as a skyscraper. Essentially just a super large ice sculpture. Upon seeing this ice sculpture, Team Rocket get very excited, as they think that it might actually be rare treasure after all, and they might be able to sell it for a lot of money if they took some of the shards of crystal. So, Jessie managed to pull one off, and gave it to Meowth, who inspects it as best he can, but decides that in order to get a true inspection, he needed to lick it, and when he does, he discovers that it wasn't actually crystal, but just ice. This takes Meowth out of the enamored state that he was in, because he clearly had to be out of his mind to lick a sculpture. And now that he's back in his mind, he immediately questioned why the fuck he tried licking ice, worrying that it could make him sick. Jessie and James told him to shut up and quit worrying, explaining that Meowth should just be grateful that he did something good for the team, as now that Team Rocket had discovered that the crystal sculpture wasn't rare, they're just like, you know what, fuck it, we're not gonna find anything rare here, we already have our water, so let's just go back to our normal plan of stealing Pikachu. So James catches Ash off guard and grabs Pikachu from his hands, as Team Rocket throws off their disguises and do their motto. With James still just being able to hold Pikachu, despite his attempts to shock him, because he had rubber gloves on. Seeing Team Rocket reveal themselves makes Ash instantly want to battle them, so he can get Pikachu back. So Ash goes out to send out one of his Pokemon, as Jessie sends out her Arbok. However, Gango steps in, pleading that Ash doesn't battle, so that it doesn't mess up the light. Ash questioned what the fuck Gango meant by this, with Gango stating that he was worried that Ash could accidentally break this tower that was probably linked to the light. Gango wasn't entirely against battling though, as he figured that he could be more careful as to not break the sculpture. So he sent out his Venusaur, and as Arbok went to tackle it, Venusaur was able to withstand it and uses the momentum from the tackle to its advantage as Venusaur pushes Arbok into the air straight into Team Rocket. This knocks Team Rocket over, and also knocks Pikachu out of James' hands, freeing him. James then goes to send out his Weezing, but before he can do so, Gango has his Venusaur use Solar Beam, which sends Team Rocket blasting off. Gango then reveals that the reason why he had a Venusaur, despite his reluctance to battle, was because he used to be a Pokemon trainer before he became an artist, and he said that he was inspired after seeing the lights to battle to protect them, apologizing to Ash for doubting that he would be able to do so. Anyways, with Team Rocket gone, the sun rises, and water suddenly starts shooting out of the ground into the nearby lake bed. Of course, being the Remoraid Lake, as that's where Ash and the gang had ended up. So this now meant that there was water in the Remoraid Lake once again. As soon as the water appears, the Remoraids suddenly appear out of the water and use Water Gun and an Ice Beam on the sculpture, which enlarges it, essentially turning it into a huge pillar. Upon seeing this beautiful display, Misty wanted to catch one of the Remoraid and prove that they weren't that difficult to catch after all, but as soon as she threw the Pokeball, she soon discovered why they were so difficult to catch, as all the Remoraid swarmed together into one group, meaning that the Pokeball didn't work, since a Pokeball could only capture one Pokemon, and all of the other Remoraid were blocking it. Team Rocket's laughs can then be heard. Team Rocket had already fucking returned and were laughing their ass off at Misty's failure, stating that there was more than one way to catch a Pokemon. You didn't need a Pokeball, but instead, you could use a net. And as if on cue, Team Rocket launched a net from their Meowth balloon and captured all the Remoraid inside. Ash tries to send in one of his Pokemon to save the Remoraid from the net, but Gango stops them as he tells Ash that he had a feeling that the Remoraid could save themselves, as they'd managed to be independent for all these years. Gango turned out to be right, as all the Remoraid proceeded to use Water Gun to launch themselves up from their bottoms, which breaks a hole in not only the net, but the Meowth balloon, setting all the Remoraid free, and causing the Meowth balloon to begin crashing as Team Rocket goes blasting off. With Team Rocket gone, Ash and the gang and Gango then discover the true cause of the lights, being the ice being melted by the sun. Essentially, as the pillar of ice was melting, the sun's rays were being refracted through the evaporating water vapor. Basically, the lights were caused by a reflection. The ice melting also obviously turns the ice into water, and all this water then flows into the river, explaining why the river was suddenly replenished every 12 years. The Remoraid then go into this river to get some water, so that they can be prepared to be essentially hibernating in the empty Remoraid lake bed for 12 years until they eventually have to come out again to make some more ice so that they can keep doing the cycle of replenishing their water supply over and over again. Basically, the Remoraid's cycle was essentially make some ice and then use that melted water from the ice to store water inside of you, and then use that water in 12 years to make more ice, and just keep the thing going. Gango then comments how he actually found the story of the Remoraid and what they did to survive more interesting than the light story, as them just being a reflection is kind of fucking boring. Ash then reminds Gango how he never got to do the drawing of the lights that he wanted to, with Gango replying that he didn't really care anymore since he was now more interested in the Remoraid, and added that the memories that he got from this experience were worth way more than any drawing that he could have made. Damn, just giving up on a 24-year-old goal like that? Alright. Well, anyways, the episode ends with Ash and the gang and Gango and Nurse Joy returning to the Pokemon Center, with Nurse Joy checking on the flower that she had now put into a pot from earlier on in the desert trek. Ash and the gang then continue on their journey as they look up into the sky and see the reflected lights one more time.